The 90s kid. Hey guys, welcome to the 90s kid. And look, it's one of those videos with my face, so that's pretty exciting, right? I don't have a cool set with like a giant crap ton of games and posters. I've got a Thunder Zord. That's pretty cool, right? War. War never changes. In the early 90s, the country was gripped in the console wars. On one side you had the Sega Genesis, and on the other side you had the SNES. Also, there was the TurboGrafx. Just doing its best. Like so many who fought in this war, it tore our family apart, brother against brother. I supported the SNES, and my brother, who was a teenager and loved the arcades, supported the Sega Genesis. It was the beginning of a rift between my brother and I. Later on, he would get the Sony PlayStation and I would get the Nintendo 64. He would get the Xbox, I would get the GameCube. I would get the Nintendo Wii. He grew up and moved beyond video games. He became a father of 6 children, living a much more fulfilling life. This started out as a joke, and then it just got real. Okay, so the Sega Genesis I actually never owned myself back in the day, but my brother owned it, and secretly I was kind of jealous of some of the games that he owned for it. So I actually do have fond memories of the Sega Genesis, and back in the 90s, really what differentiated the Sega Genesis from the SNES is that it was clearly targeted towards older kids. I wasn't a teenager, my brother was a teenager, so he naturally gravitated towards the Sega Genesis. He was also a bigger fan of the arcades than I was, and in the early days at least, the Sega Genesis was primarily all about the fact that it could bring the arcade experience home. So, that's my background with the Sega Genesis. Never owned one, but I'm very fond of the console. I have some very fond memories of playing it with my brother. So, when the Sega Genesis Mini was announced, I was actually pretty excited because some of the games that it showed would be coming on the console are games that I actually played back in the day and that I really liked. Now, there's been quite a number of retro consoles featuring libraries of Sega Genesis games, so what sets this one apart? Well, the first and most notable thing is the case. This thing has been absolutely lovingly crafted. Obviously, it looks just like the Mark I Genesis, much like the NES Classic and SNES Classic look like their respective consoles. However, there is an attention to detail on the Sega Genesis Mini that is just not present on the NES Classic or SNES Classic. The volume knob on the front actually works. I mean, it moves. It doesn't actually do anything, but it moves. The dust cover for the cartridges, despite the fact that it has absolutely no function, you can actually stick your finger in there and it, actually opens up. On the bottom and the side, I think it's incredible that they included the little spot where you can take the cover off that would connect the Sega CD to the system. Even though, again, there's no official, mini Sega CD to plug into it. There's just a level of love that was put into the design of this case that is immediately recognizable. That love, of course, transfers over to the 2 controllers that are included with the system. They are the 3-button variant that shipped with the original system, and while I personally think that the 6-button variant are better controllers, I think for the nostalgia factor and the whole package, it's great that they included that 3-button controller. And I love the feel of the 3-button controller. I love the look. I love that it's the original one with the red highlights. The whole package looks really, really well done. And it reminds you just how far ahead of the competition Sega was when it came to console design. This thing looks sleek, and to this day still looks incredible to me. When you plug the system in, you'll be greeted with the interface. It plays a medley of songs from the games that are on the system. It has the sort of settings that you kind of come to expect. You can change the screen size to a 4:3 ratio or to, of course, the full screen widescreen. Don't set it to the widescreen. These games were made to play in the 4:3 ratio. I mean, unless, of course, you prefer the widescreen, in which case, what the hell do I care? Would be nice if, like on the SNES Classic and NES Classic, you could actually apply a CRT filter, but it's not a deal breaker, and it's definitely not something that I'm knocking the console for. Just kind of wish it was there. There are a couple borders that you can put up, which... Like the NES Classic and SNES Classic, while you're playing the game, pressing the reset button on the console brings up a menu that'll allow you to, either save the state. There's 4 slots per game that allows you to save state, which is great on some of these older games that don't have a save feature. And then, of course, it also allows you to go back to the main menu and switch up games. However, one vast improvement that Sega has made that sets it apart from the NES Classic and SNES Classic. It's such a simple thing, but if you hold the start button for like 3 seconds, it brings that menu up. So you don't have to get up and press the reset button on the console. That sounds like such a small thing, but it ends up being incredible, and I really wish now that the NES Classic and the SNES Classic had the same feature. Now, as far as the games that are included on the system, I feel like they did a really good job in what they chose. They chose quite a number of the early titles that demonstrated what set the console apart, and then the later editions, the games that came about later, they did a really good job of choosing the games that set the Genesis apart from the Super Nintendo. I don't know how much of this is just psychological remnants of Sega's marketing strategy about their blast processing and how fast the Genesis was, but certain types of games, i.e. shooters and beat-em-ups and run-and-guns, feel better on the Genesis to me than they do on the SNES, and they've done a great job of including games that really sell those genres. So I wanted to go through and just kind of go through some of the standout games that they've included. The first one is Castlevania Bloodlines, because if you're going to release a classic console, and there was a Castlevania game that was on that console, you need to include that game. I'm looking at you, Sony. I feel like Bloodlines is often overlooked. It's kind of existing in the shadows of its 2 older 16-bit brothers. Super Castlevania 4 and Castlevania Rondo of Blood. But if you haven't checked out Bloodlines, I honestly recommend sinking your teeth into it. It's a fantastic game. Very much a classic in the Castlevania series. One of the other big inclusions is, of course, Golden Axe. Whether you play that game in single player or 2-player, that game is just a blast to play through. It also includes the original pack-in title, Altered Beast, so... Power up! That's cool. One of the big inclusions, and the inclusion that got me most excited for the system, is, of course, Mega Man Wily Wars. Now, for those of you in the PAL region, you may be wondering what's the big deal, but that's because you guys actually got this game released to you. For us in the States, you had to have a subscription to Sega Channel, the sort of online service that you could hook your console up to, but it was through cable TV. If you've never heard of it, don't worry, you're not alone. So anyways, we never really got to play it legitimately here in the States, so to have that compilation is wonderful. If you don't know, the Wily Wars collects Mega Man 1, 2, and 3, but of course gives them 16-bit reskins. It's definitely worth a playthrough. As far as beat-em-ups go, it has the one beat-em-up game that I think you need to include, and that's of course Streets of Rage 2, which in my opinion is the best beat-em-up from the 16-bit era. It's got fantastic music, the sprites look incredible, and it just feels satisfying in a way that only Genesis beat-em-ups do. Of course, you've got the Disney classics like Mickey Mouse in the Castle of Illusion, which is fantastic.
Here's Mickey Mouse, and if you take a look, he really looks exactly like himself.
Yeah, no, he doesn't quite look right in this game, but good salesmanship. And then you've got what, for me, is the better game, and that's purely based on nostalgic reasons, and that is Mickey and Donald World of Illusion. And the only reason why I think that's the better game is because that's like one of the only games that my brother would actually sit down and play with me. So that game always holds a special place in my heart, always will. And then of course my favorite game that's included, Gunstar Heroes. There's just something about this game in its design, in its sound effects, its music. It is charming AF. Of course, you've got Sonic 1 and 2. I'm bit bummed that Sonic 3 isn't included, but at least we've got the second game, which is almost as good as the third game in my book, and then you've got the first game, which of course laid the groundwork for the whole series. One thing that is missing that is kind of a bummer, there are no real sports titles on the system, which is a bit odd to me, because I feel like of the 16-bit generation, the Genesis had the best sports games, and indeed that's what it was originally sold on, was the arcade sports action. So it's a little bit befuddling to me that there aren't sports games included. I don't know, it seems like an oversight to me. They probably should have included a couple of sports games, but then there may also be licensing issues with that. I don't know what went on behind the scenes. It is a noticeable blind spot, though. There's also some other notable exclusions, like, Michael Jackson's Moonwalker, which was a fantastic game that, in hindsight, has some problematic elements, and it makes sense why it wasn't included.
This is Michael's here is trying to save these kids who've been kidnapped.
But yeah, overall, the package that you get with the Sega Genesis Mini is absolutely well done. It does a very good job of wrapping up what made the console so great back in the 90s. It is definitely something that if you have an interest in the Genesis, and perhaps you don't have a lot of Genesis games or you don't even own a Genesis anymore, I would absolutely recommend picking it up. It's the same price as the SNES Classic was. You also get 2 controllers, you get 40 fantastic games. So overall, I would give the Sega Genesis Mini a solid 9 out of 10. I think it is well worth the investment. It's every bit as much of a shot of nostalgia as the SNES Classic and NES Classic. Anyways, Sega Genesis Mini is fantastic, which brings me to the final and really the only point that I wanted to make with this video, which is Nintendo, get your asses out of your head, and by that I mean your head out of your asses, and make a Nintendo 64 Classic, please. Please. Also, Sega, if you want to make a Dreamcast Classic, take my money. Take my money, and I'll gladly give it to you. So yeah, that's my thoughts on the Sega Genesis Mini. What do you guys think? Are you going to pick it up? Have you picked it up? Have you enjoyed it so far? Let me know in the comments below. I'm going to make more videos. The next one's probably going to be a review of The Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening. It was kind of a big week a couple weeks ago, and I wanted to take my time with both products to make sure that I gave a good review. So sorry it's a little bit late, but it is what it is. The video after that, I'm still making a video about basically pitting Donkey Kong Country and Super Mario World against each other to see which is the superior platformer on the SNES. You know what? I'm going to put a poll up, too, right now. There's a poll. What do you guys think? Which one's better, Donkey Kong Country or Super Mario World? Let me know and I'll mention it in the video. I'll work it in there. So yeah, a lot of stuff coming down the pipeline. Sorry I've been a little bit slow. Love you, bye!